Do you want to know if someone is lying to you? Well, the best way to learn is through a real-life example and with the aid of an expert with over 20 years of experience in deception analysis, which is exactly what I'm going to give you guys today. We are continuing our analysis of the now infamous Karen Read murder retrial, and more specifically, we're looking at Jen McCabe's witness testimony on day 8 of the trial, right before the lunch break. And if you know me, you know this is right up my alley. We have allegations of government collusion, and specifically, we're looking at members of the Canton Police Department. And we're also watching a battle over perception. The attorneys are on the quest for truth and reality, and so are we. And as I said before, I'm not doing this alone. I'm actually doing it with Sergio Dinaro, and he's a deception detection expert with experience in federal safety, security, and intelligence operations. And he was an interrogator for the Department of Defense, so he knows his stuff. Sergio has already published an in-depth video analyzing McCabe's day 8 testimony prior to the lunch break, so if you haven't seen it yet, you should definitely check it out. But in this series, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and break down how deception detection really works, what signals Sergio looks at when he's looking at the McCabe testimony, and of course, I'm going to be pushing back because I am a natural contrarian. We will then finish the series up by answering some questions that you guys asked me and him in our videos. And so with that, and without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so I think we all know what we have to discuss first, and this is actually a day 7 situation, and it's the infamous Jen McCabe laugh. So I'm gonna play a clip in a moment, but McCabe seems to laugh when recalling events of the morning of O'Keefe's death. This is specifically related to Karen Read crying and screaming about her boyfriend, and then Roberts telling her to shut the fuck up. But I'm wondering what's really going on here. You have an opinion. We have some comments that are pushing back a little bit. I have some questions. So let's watch the clip and let's analyze it.
You said my client is screaming to the top of her lungs. Is that right?
Yes, she was.
And Carrie Roberts screaming back at her.
Yes.
Shut up or shut the fuck up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You say that this is her laughing at the memory of a tragic scene of her alleged friend, Karen Read, crying over the dead body, other dead alleged friend, John O'Keefe. And I say alleged because if she's laughing, are they actually friends? But that's a whole separate issue. So first, I have a couple questions, and we're going to take them one by one. I want to zoom out, and we all know that people laugh at inappropriate times. This is kind of a coping mechanism. People laugh at funerals, when they're given bad news, etc. And so my question is, what differentiates that from this situation? How do you know McCabe isn't simply anxious, uncomfortable, or trying to relieve some very pent-up stress in a stressful situation? And as some people actually have suggested in your comments, how do we know that she's not just laughing at the fact that Attorney Jackson says the word fuck in a very formal setting?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because what I do focuses so heavily on verbiage that when we transition to linguistics or something like laughing in court, then that's something that I have a natural intuition for, but a lot less formal training in. And so when you gave me these questions to prep, I thought, well, I need to look this up, because how do I explain something that when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that just registered to me that way. But now I need to look it up and actually make sure that I saw it correctly. So I did some research, and I'm going to read you a couple of blurbs that I found from the Behavior Research Lab Science of People. I use that a lot as a reference for micro expressions because Vanessa Van Edwards is an expert in this area, and I really like her stuff. I like the way she presents it. So I'm going to read this to you. It says, eye contact and social cue monitoring. During true humor, people often share the laughter with others, making eye contact or at least not feeling ashamed of laughing. In a nervous laughter scenario, the person might quickly glance around to see others' reactions or avoid eye contact out of embarrassment. They often recognize on some level that this is not the time to laugh. So you might see a fleeting look of oops or panic in their eyes, even as they chuckle. Now, the second point that I wanted to point out here is duration and timing. Genuine amusement laughter tends to flow naturally and fade out gradually, whereas inappropriate laughter might start and stop abruptly. For example, a real laugh often ends smoothly as the humor passes. So when I read this, I was like, okay, yes, that does explain exactly what I was seeing there, because as I go back and watch that video, you notice a couple of things. First, and this is very common, when Attorney Jackson, when he's stating the question, he mentions Carrie Roberts by name. And when he does that, Jen McCabe looks directly off to the left. And it looks like she's making eye contact with an individual person. And we know that Carrie Roberts was there because she testified right after Karen Reed. I don't know with certainty that she's making eye contact with Carrie Roberts, but that's the assumption. When he says Carrie Roberts, people will often look at that person. Now, once she starts laughing, she tries to control it, and then she glances over at the same person that she was looking at. Now, maybe it wasn't Carrie Roberts, but it would just make sense. I don't know why she would be looking at the same person twice that wasn't Carrie Roberts.
Could it be the jury, though? She does look at the jury a lot throughout her entire testimony. Is it possible that that look was evidence of her being like, oh, oops, maybe I shouldn't have laughed, over at the jury in a guilty? What do you think?
Yeah, and again, because we can't tell who she's looking at, so I'm going based on the knowledge that when, for example, if you're talking about something random in your house, if you say the TV keeps flickering on and off, and you're talking to somebody, that person will usually glance over at the TV and look at it.
Yeah.
Even if it's not on, they'll usually look over and glance at it.
Yeah.
So that principle is what I'm going by here. But again, I don't know that with certainty. But the look that she gives, it's a look of a shared secret or of a shared joke, like an inside joke kind of. That's the kind of feeling that I get when she says it. I know a lot of people aren't going to like that explanation, but that's what I see when I see that look from her.
Well, I think one of the big things about being an expert in something is you get to a point where you just know. You know by looking at something, and you can't necessarily pick out exactly what's the case. Essentially, what I'm trying to say when it comes back to you is that when you are an expert in something, it feels intuitive, but it really does go back to a real analysis or a real rule. It's just that it's not necessarily in the front of your mind. It's more of a subconscious thing because you've done it so many times. You know exactly what to look for. You know what's going on. And so that intuition is real knowledge. And in experts, it's going to come across like, well, I know because I've been doing this for so long. And so maybe somebody's not happy with that answer, but I do want to say that's kind of the issue when you're an expert. It's like when you know, you know. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. There's a lot of research on that. And I didn't research it before this to give quotes, but there's a lot of research on people's ability to, in emergency situations, draw from a knowledge bank that they have, and it basically bypasses the prefrontal cortex. So you're not realizing that you're thinking about it, but what you're seeing is not new. And yeah, I just have a lot of experience reading that. And so now when I see an expression like that, what bothers me is that it's hard to articulate. But the other thing that I do want to mention is the duration and timing, because when somebody laughs inappropriately, so either whether it's because somebody says the word fuck in court, or if it's at a funeral, or then when they receive really bad news, they're actually not wanting to laugh. They're not laughing because it's funny. They're laughing as it's like a knee-jerk reaction to stabilize your emotions. At least that's what most of the research is saying. However, you'll often see a conflicted look on the person's face where their mouth might laugh, but their eyes have a look of panic because they don't want to be laughing. That's not, it's not funny, and they know it's not funny, and they don't want to laugh at it. And that's not what we see. The other thing is we don't see her stop abruptly. She has that very, like it was described here, a real laugh often ends smoothly as the humor passes, which is the part that we see with Jen McCabe, because she tries to stifle that laugh, but if she didn't think it was funny, that would have been the end of it. But she has a stupid smirk on her face that she can't get rid of because she, in my opinion, because when she glances over at Carrie Roberts, she has that shared inside joke. Yeah. Because I'm sure they laughed about that for a long time. So she has that shared inside joke that she just can't get that smile off her face.
Something also interesting is McCabe does not apologize in this situation. And we all know that McCabe, she is an apologetic person. She's apologizing for everything all the time. We talked about it in our other videos. And so if there's any time to apologize for doing something inappropriately, it would be when you laugh at somebody crying because their boyfriend is dead in the snow. And we don't get an apology from Jen McCabe in this situation. So it's like, okay, why isn't she apologizing now? Now is the time to apologize. We're waiting for it. Why hasn't it happened?
Yeah, that's a great observation, because you're 100% right. Every time that she stumbles in a way that's like, oops, I shouldn't have said that word, or, you know, like anytime she makes a mistake, she immediately gives you that apology. But in here, that never crosses her mind, that an apology, because, well, in my opinion, because that's a shared inside joke. That was
Yeah.
genuine laughter that she tries. It doesn't occur to her because it wasn't a mistake.
Yeah. It was just a natural response, and it just kind of flowed. And so why apologize for that? Whereas when she's stumbling through her words or she knocks a mic or something, it's like, oh, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that, whatever. And so it's not natural, especially if, as you're saying, like lots of times she's apologizing when she is being deceptive, right? Okay. So she's good. She already knows she's making a mistake and that she's being deceptive. She's not necessarily telling the truth. So it's almost like apologizing is already on the tip of her tongue. Whereas in this situation, it's just reactionary. She's not being deceptive. She's actually totally honest. She finds it very funny.
Yeah.
Why would you be apologizing when you're being honest? According to her, she's not.
Yeah,
she's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think this actually leads to another big question, which is it's interesting to consider. The question is Jen McCabe then a bad person? And does she actually find this funny? Because if she's laughing and she's laughing at pain of the situation and there's joy, then the natural conclusion would be, yeah, she's laughing at a situation, at her friend's death, all of that. And so are we prepared to come to that conclusion? And before we answer that question, I'm going to jump into a hypothetical because I want us to consider what's actually going on here, okay? So we have a mother who's involved in a cover-up and a setup, and she's desperate. This is a hypothetical. This mother is desperate to cover up the actions of her friends and her relatives, and she's trying to protect her children. She potentially is fearing for her own life if other people are involved in this, right? And so is this mother evil enough to laugh at someone else's misery on the spectrum of badness? Now, we already know that a cover-up and all of that, that's bad. But laughing at someone dying, that's really bad. That's like evil.
Yeah, that's delving a little more into the realm of philosophy and ethics, and I like that. So
yeah.
While I am not an expert on philosophy and ethics, I can give you my opinion on this.
Yes, of course.
Which is, I personally draw a strong distinction between actions that may seem bad and actions that are evil. If my family was in danger, I would do absolutely anything to protect them. Just no matter what. Even if I had to do bad things, I wouldn't honestly have a problem with it.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about me, but I've already made that decision that if it's my family on the line, I'm going to do whatever it takes.
I think a lot of people would agree with you on that.
Now, it's something completely different to be evil. Evil people enjoy the act of causing pain to other people. And well, while I would definitely do whatever I needed to do to protect my family, I wouldn't enjoy it. That's something very different.
Yeah, it is.
So on a spectrum of bad to evil, I would not call somebody who is, let's say hypothetically, on the stand lying to protect their family, I would not call that evil. I would call that bad. But the intent there, which I think is the main point of this, if the intent is to protect your family, then I just wouldn't label that person as evil. An evil person derives enjoyment from other people's misery. And when you get a glimpse into that, sometimes those things just overlap. Sometimes evil people get to do bad things in the name of protecting your family or protecting your country. There are a lot of psychopaths in the military and the police because they've found an outlet. They can do what they enjoy doing in an environment where it's legal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you put that really well, that, it's definitely bad to do certain things. There's a spectrum here. We are also looking at evil, and that sometimes evil people are put in positions to do bad things in the name of good things, or in the name of things that maybe aren't good, but the average person would understand, like, yeah, you're trying to protect your family, or you're a police officer, or you're in the military. Okay, we understand it. And that's why I wanted to ask this question, because it's complex. There is nuance, and not everything is black and white, right? It's not good or bad all the time. There's a lot more going on here, so I thought it was important to ask that question, and I think you analyzed that very well. So thank you. Okay, so then now we have covered that. That was day 7. We are moving on to day 8. So thank you guys for holding with us or hanging on there. But we just thought that was something we really wanted to cover, and I'm sure you wanted to hear a little bit about it as well. You have said previously that when someone does not answer a question, it is a case of 100% deception. And again, I'm going to say it's not really applicable to compound questions because we don't really know, as you just discussed. But if there's just a direct question, that person's just going to evade it or answer it in a way that sounds like they might be answering it, but they're not actually addressing the question, that is a case of 100% deception. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because we actually discussed how deception analysis can be really helpful when you're trying to find a significant other. When I was in the initial stages of dating, I kind of baselined my dates. And obviously I did not have any experience in deception analysis. So I was not literally baselining my dates, although that would have been really helpful. I was asking direct questions. I was not assuming what the answer was going to be, and I wasn't letting my fantasy of how I wish they would answer the question get in the way of how they actually answered the question. And that is what is so important when it comes to finding a significant other, and why baselining your date can be so important, and why we need to remember that if somebody doesn't answer the question, it's deception 100% of the time. And so, audience, if you're on a date and you ask direct questions, pay attention to the way the person answers that question. Don't think that you know what the answer is before they answer it. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap. And Sergio, you mentioned this, that people, they have a hard time noticing when someone's being deceptive because already kind of creating the answer in their head. And then they just kind of make that person's answer follow that train of thought, right? But if you can consciously not do that and you ask direct questions and you wait for the person to respond and you see how they respond and whether they're being comfortable or not, it can be very helpful in a dating situation. So I want to bring that up because we talked about it previously. You mentioned it in the most recent video for day 8 that non-answers are 100% deception. And so I want to bring that up again. Is there anything you want to add to that?
It's such a good point because there's a couple things there. Is first off, when a person's going on a date, they're so optimistic. They want everything to go well and they want things, especially if they know the person a little bit, or if they find that person attractive, or there's something about their personality that they really like, then that bias, it causes you to, well, I guess it's called confirmation bias, right? You exclusively look for things that are going to confirm that they are the person that you're looking for, and you're going to exclude the stuff that is bad news to you. So, and I think a big part of that is, and I tell this to my wife's friends, I think it's important to make a list before you go on a date of the things that are important to you. Because a lot of people, myself included, way back in the day, I didn't have a good solid definition of what I wanted. So when you're talking to somebody, it's hard if you don't really know what you want. Then you ask them questions, and then they're going to present their answers in a way that looks good to them. You know, they're going to highlight, if it's an answer that you might not like, they're going to highlight, you know, this happened, so this is why I had to make that decision. And if you don't know what you're looking for, everything sounds like it's reasonable. So yeah, I think when you go into that type of situation, it's important to know what you want and then be honest with yourself about whether or not you're seeing that. And like you mentioned in the beginning of this, if you ask a question that's a hard question and you don't get a direct answer to it, that is your answer. So I think it's hard. We've been trained through social training that to be polite, you need to listen to the whole answer. Don't jump to conclusions. You don't know something until you've heard the whole story. For me, that doesn't apply anymore. So it's similar to like if I am asking somebody a question and I know that they look up and to the right if they're being deceptive, as soon as they look up and to the right, the answer doesn't matter to me anymore because I already know that it's deceptive. So that applies in this case too, because if you ask a tough question and they don't answer it, and you know that this is a question that's important to you, and they either move the target, you know, they change your question a little bit, and then they answer it in a way that they can answer it truthfully and that makes them look good, that's it. Their answer doesn't matter because the fact that they didn't answer your question directly is the answer to your question.
Yeah, exactly. You just have to be okay with moving on and realizing that that's it. You can't second guess something like that. You really can't. And I think that's super important because without even realizing that it was somewhat related to deception analysis, that was kind of what I was doing at the time. And in my opinion, I think it's totally fair to continue to ask hard questions throughout your entire relationship, actually, but to ask questions that you're trying to figure out, you're essentially kind of baselining them for weeks. It doesn't have to be a first date thing. It should be a first date thing, but it could be a second, third, fourth. You should be able to do it for weeks because
until you're engaged.
Really, because you need to really make sure that the person that you end up marrying is an actual honest individual and they're not trying to deceive you. And I think this is a huge issue. So I speak from the position of experience as a woman, I used to follow various dating Instagram influencers that were really good at what they did. And one thing that they pointed out, and I think women do this a lot, is they fall in love with the idea of someone rather than who they actually are. And that is exactly what we're talking about when you ask a question, you answer it in your head, and then you listen to their answer, and then you essentially just combine the answers and move forward or whatever. And so then back to the trial, when somebody on the witness stand doesn't answer your question, that's 100% deceptive, as Sergio says.
Yeah. If you can't accept this answer in one scenario, you can't accept it in any scenario.
Exactly. I think that it's important to recognize that this stuff is very interesting in the true crime realm. It's also very interesting because this stuff can be applied to your everyday life and it can make your life better. And so if you are able to strategically analyze things and, try and be a little more logical about things, it could really help you out and lead to positive outcomes in your life. But okay, back to the trial. That was a little digression. So we are still discussing the SUV, and you next point out that McCabe says something truthful. And I want to discuss that first because it's so rare. No, but I want to discuss that because it's interesting.
Election, Ms. McCabe, what you said in June of 2023 about seeing the SUV at the location at 12:45.
I see what I read. Sorry. I saw what I just read. I don't remember my exact words of every testimony, but I did just read that, yes.
You say that when she says, I don't remember my exact words, she's being truthful. And you discussed this a bit later on in your video, but I wanted to spend more time on it. Is she using the truth in a deceptive way? And that question is, can people use the truth in a deceptive way? Because you're right. She's being truthful because there's no way she remembers exactly what she said. And so by inserting the word exact, suddenly she's being truthful, and it's easier to deceive or lie when you're actually kind of being truthful. And so by rephrasing a sentence to make it more truthful, but with the intent of being deceptive, that is still deceptive. How would you categorize this?
It falls under the general category of not answering the question, actually, because It's moving the target. But she takes the question and she changes it slightly. Mm-hmm. And then she answers a slightly different question, what's technically truthful. And so that gives the listener, if they're not paying close attention to the fact that the question has been changed, then they receive an answer that's direct and sounds truthful. So it's important to always keep in mind what the actual question is. So yeah, it's called moving the target. So he doesn't ask, do you remember your exact words? Mm-hmm. He asks if her memory has been generally refreshed about that incident. Mm-hmm. And so when she changes the question to, I don't remember my exact words, that was a little tongue-in-cheek that she was honestly not remembering her exact words.
Yeah.
But the actual indicator there was the fact that she didn't answer the question. There's a lot of ways to not answer the question, but one of them is moving the target. It's just changing the question a little bit.
What's so funny about this is like, if you are being honest in every instance you're asked these questions, I don't understand why you have to remember the exact word. Like, how are you so confused about this? You actually don't even have to remember what you said in the last trial or to the grand jury, because if it was honest, it wouldn't even matter if you remembered or not, because you just know what it actually is. And she kind of says that later. She's like, well, I don't need to remember, like, I already know because it's the truth. This is what happened or whatever. I'm paraphrasing. She says something to that effect. And it's like, okay, so why did you have to say that then? Just say the answer, just answer the question at that point then. Why are you trying so hard? It's just so funny to kind of watch her struggle through all of this. And actually, it's way more simple. That's another thing that I've realized when I'm watching this is, because my job is to be kind of contrarian and I'm always pushing back and stuff, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt because I have to in order to do what I do. But then when I step back and I'm like, okay, but stop making everything so complicated, Carolyn. A lot of these questions are relatively simple. Some are a little complicated. I will say some of the compound questions and all of that. Okay, that is a little complicated. But a lot of these, very simple, and the answer should be simple. And so that goes to another thing I want to say is, if somebody makes something overly complicated, are they being deceptive?
If they're making something overly complicated, that's a really good question because it's nuanced. And so it depends on if they're trying to change the original question. Because if a question is just sort of generic, which a lot of like philosophical questions, for example, are pretty generic. You know, if there was one person on the track and there's 5 people on the track over here and the train's going towards the the 5 people, would you move the train to the other track? And to try and make that question more complicated is not a matter of being deceptive. It's a matter of trying to get more information in order to answer a question. And so that's what we want to pay attention to if someone like Jen McCabe is trying to overcomplicate things. So is it reasonable that she needs this other information in order to answer the question?
Yeah.
And in her case, what she's doing is just she's overcomplicating things so that she can change the question a little bit and then not answer the question directly.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of keeping a clear mind when you're asking the question of what are you looking for? What does an answer in the positive and an answer in the negative look like? So that if you don't get one of those, you know that they're not answering your question.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so shortly after, Attorney Jackson starts discussing McCabe's conversation with Trooper Prince. We're going to look at the clip, and then we're going to discuss it.
Ms. McCabe, my question is, did you tell Trooper Prince 3 days after the fact, I spoke with Karen Reed? Yes or no?
If you have a report, I don't remember the specifics. I met with many, many police officers.
First, I just want to say the look on her face. She just has this look on her face that's so, I don't know, what are you talking about? And it's, don't play dumb.
Yeah.
That's just annoying. But, okay. You say that she's being deceptive here when she says, I don't remember, because it's attached to the word specifics. She's saying, I don't remember the specifics. My question is, why is it deceptive when she says specifics, but not when she says, I don't remember my exact words, like we just discussed?
So it is deceptive.
I know both of these are deceptive, but saying I don't remember my exact words is truthful from from the perspective of being deceptive. I don't know how to even word that.
So when
I
she
don't know how
said,
to word that, but you know what I'm saying.
because that one is changing the target. So she's saying she's changing the question a little bit, and then she's saying I don't remember the exact words. But actually, this is the same thing, because she changes it and she says the specifics, and then she says I don't remember the specifics. I did at one point explain that when she uses the word specifics, it's the same as using the word exact.
Okay, so these are both her being truthful, but in a deceptive way, in that she is adding extra words to make it easier to essentially lie, because we already have covered this in our last video, but it's very hard for the average person to lie. Most people, you don't like lying, your brain does not want to lie. And so if you can finagle a way to essentially tell the truth while still lying, you're probably going to do it. And that is exactly what's going on right here.
Yeah, it's a yes or no question, and she says, I don't remember the specifics. So she changes the question. It's actually very similar. It's another example of that same principle.
I want to find a word it's the truth through deception, but it's not. That's not what it is. It's deception through the truth or something like that. I don't know. I just want to label it because it's so, I don't know why it fascinates me, but it kind of does fascinate me because I think a lot of people do this in everyday life as well. I think it's a very common way people are deceptive. And I don't even think people are consciously aware of it always. I don't think there's some mastermind, ooh, I'm going to say it this way. I think it's just a natural way to get around having to actually fabricate a lie when you just add some extra words in there and you're like, well, I technically did tell the truth, Yeah,
and there's a feeling, I guess, that we have sort of a collective archive of all of the conversations that we've had with people over the course of our lives. And we don't remember those things specifically. We don't remember word for word every single conversation. But we do generally remember saying certain things, like saying, I don't really remember this. That doesn't sound like saying that would be deception, because I'm pretty sure I've said that at some point in my life. But the point of deception detection is not that somebody who's being deceptive is going to say something that you've never used before. The point is that you have to pay attention to the question and then whether or not they're answering the question.
It's tricky.
Yeah, because it's the manipulation of the question itself that is the deception.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that I find so interesting is it's not super obvious. It's the manipulation of, and what's hard about the manipulation of the question is then you have to remember the question, which is why deception analysis is also very hard just in person, right? And people asked this in the last video, if you know someone for a really long time, are you good at telling if they're deceptive? And you essentially were like, no, and then you're not. But generally, on average. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, especially because in person, trying to determine if someone's being deceptive or not takes a lot of conscious effort. And then you have to remember exactly what you said, which is why understanding some of the basic rules is helpful, especially in a dating situation or when you're trying to make friends or when you're talking to your boss who is maybe a liar. You have to remember that and keep that into consideration. But you're not always going to be able to analyze it to the degree that, you know, you and I are able to do this right now, watching things 5 times over, reading the transcript, all of that.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I have to write out these transcripts so that I can sit and pick apart every linguistic detail. Mm-hmm. But there are certain principles that you can use in real time.
Yeah.
So you don't have to remember every different way off the top of your head that a question can be manipulated. But if you can just make sure that they're answering your question directly, just remember your question so that if it's not answered, that's your check. That's your check and balance right there. It doesn't matter how they didn't answer your question. It just matters that they didn't answer it.
Exactly.
And that you can do in real time.
Yeah, that's like a little cheat code.
Yeah.
Okay, so next. This is a bit more general. You discussed how she keeps saying in the retrial that the transcript of her testimony from grand jury is only part of what she said. And she's adding stuff to the transcript. She's like, you know, that's only a part of what I said. I said, I think. She's adding all this doubt into it. And so she's essentially calling into question the transcript. And we're going to look at an example first because I just want to reference it.
Quote, I don't know if it's my last text or if I did one more. Yeah, 12:45, hello. Because they were still there. Period. Correct?
That's a part of what I said.
And then the question was, so the dark SUV was still outside the house at 12:45. Answer, at 12:45.
And then I said, I think, my husband and I. So there's more to that conversation.
Okay, what I read you is what the transcript indicates. You said on June 8th, 2023, correct? That what you testified to in June of 2023 was you saw the SUV for the last time at 12:45. That's what you said, at least back then.
I find this crazy because if you're really going to sit here and say that the transcript is wrong, is she essentially saying that the court reporter targeted her specifically and was, I'm just going to leave things out because I want to? That's not going to happen. That does not happen. And so how can a transcript of a previous, and I believe this is from the grand jury, right? Nonetheless, it is testimony. There's a transcript. It is real. And so I'm wondering, how can a transcript of a previous testimony be so wrong and only contain part of what she said? And she's dying on this hill. I don't even have a question here. I just want to talk about it and I wanted to show, you know, the viewers that clip because it's laughable to me to watch that. And she's just, you know, I'm going to correct the record. What?
Yeah, this is really funny. I'm glad you brought this up because this is gaslighting. And that is something that applies a lot to dating and being in relationships.
Yeah.
It's funny because you usually hear this from the other way around. It's usually the man who gaslights the woman.
Yeah.
But in here, essentially what she's doing is she's saying it doesn't matter that you have evidence in your hand, that you have the transcript of what I said. You're wrong. That's wrong. Everything's wrong. And you're stupid if you believe what's there. What I'm telling you right now is the only thing that matters. And for people who aren't extremely self-confident, they'll buckle under that and say, okay, yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm not looking at the transcript. I mean, technically he's reading it, so I can't see it. If she says it's not right, who's to say she's not right? Who's to say she's not telling the truth right now? Like, that mentality is so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's so like
manipulative.
It's manipulative, but it's so self-defeating. It undermines your own ability to just see reality because it's so clear right here. There's no question. Why is the trial not just over right now? Like,
I agree. I just think that's so funny. It kind of reminds me of, like, you're talking about gaslighting and relationships. It's kind of like when a girl is going through her boyfriend's phone and is like, why did you call Pizza Hut at 2 a.m. on Tuesday night? And he's like, what do you mean? I didn't, that's not on the phone or something. Or another similarity would be when Jen McCabe was like, well, if the phone record says that that's who I called about her sister, when Attorney Jackson was like, did you call your sister at, 5 a.m, whatever? And she's like, if the phone record says so. What do you mean? Well, why would you answer it that way? That's a weird way to answer that question. And it just reminds me of a gaslighting toxic relationship where it's, well, I guess if the phone says I called Pizza Hut at 2 a.m, then on a Tuesday, I guess I did. And if you don't get what I'm suggesting, it's the fact that he put a girl in his phone with Pizza Hut as the name, but it's actually girl.
Yeah.
For anyone who may not be catching what I am putting down right now, that is what I'm putting down.
I am picking up what you're putting down.
Okay. But it's just kind of entertaining to watch. Trying to gaslight people based on a transcript that was written previously, that was submitted into court, that's next level. I'm wondering, in her everyday life, where she may do this in her life, then how that's going to affect people around her. Okay.
I have a feeling that it probably works better for her in her personal life than it does in court.
Yeah. And I'm really hoping that the jury isn't so easy to persuade or confuse that they're like, well, maybe the attorney is, lying right now and reading an incorrect transcript, which would never happen. But I hope that they see around that, because I think what Attorney Jackson is doing is a smart move on his part, is he is questioning Jen McCabe's credibility, and he's trying to highlight to the jury that there is a problem with her credibility and she is not to be trusted. And she essentially changes her story.
Yeah. The last thing that I want to say about the gaslighting thing is, when we talked earlier about the spectrum of bad to evil, to me, gaslighting is a little farther down that spectrum of evil. It's not just doing something to try and protect somebody, because she could have said, no, that's not correct. And then he could have said, this is the transcript. And she could have said, no, at least that's not how I remember it. I don't believe that's correct. But she doesn't. It's a tactic that is basically saying that if you believe this, you're stupid. There's more to this. You're dumb. You don't understand. There's, I said other stuff to my husband. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but I said a bunch of other stuff. And if you believe this just because he's reading it, it's because you're dumb. That. It's unnecessary. And I think that actually says something about her personality.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think people's personalities show up on the stand, especially in these high stress situations. It's just like her credibility versus either Attorney Jackson's or the court reporter, and they're just fighting, and the jury's just watching this credibility fight, and it's like, who do you think is actually right here? This is a very interesting hill to die on.
And notice she doesn't. So this is my second last point. A truthful person will live and die by their statement, by what they believe in. And so if she truthfully didn't believe that statement was accurate, she would tell him, that statement isn't accurate. That's not what I said. Yeah. And that is taking personal accountability for your own opinion or your own belief. But that's not what she's doing here. She's putting the blame onto everyone else, saying that if you believe this, that you're dumb because there's other stuff that you're not aware of and stuff. She's not referencing her own credibility. She's saying, if you believe this, it's your fault.
Yeah. She's not necessarily correcting Attorney Jackson with conviction, the kind of conviction you would expect to come from somebody who actually is like, no, that court reporter was wrong, or no, that is not what I said. You know what I mean? You don't see that fiery conviction. I was on the stand and somebody was like, you said this, and I definitely didn't say it. I would make sure they knew I did not say that. I wouldn't be like, I believe I said, I think, whatever. Okay. So next, I generally try to go in chronological order with the testimony and with your video, but we're going to jump around a bit here because this relates to the previous topic, which is her prior testimony, so it's relevant. I wanted to point something out that relates to your day 7 video that you did on McCabe, not this most recent day 8 one. So the clip is from day 8, but it's related to something you said on day 7. So let's watch.
Your exact words were, I'm asking you about your memory. You're testifying based on your memory, Ms. McCabe, are you not?
So I'm answering questions based on my memory of what happened on the 28th and the 29th. I've testified multiple times. I've been interviewed by multiple police officers. So to pinpoint one conversation is a bit of a challenge for me. But what I can tell you is what I remember from that day, which was, I'm sure, very similar to however I answered, because it's the same.
The point I want to emphasize here is that she says, but what I can tell you, and then she goes on to continue talking. previously you said that she says, what I can tell you, or I can tell you this, that it's a literal reference to what information she can or is allowed to say in court, according to whoever told her what to say, whether it's her attorney or whether it's members of the Canton Police Department or whatever. And so here I'm saying, do you think that's happening here? Do you think she's kind of like letting slip that she's like, what I can tell you is this, or what?
That is 100%. That is leakage. So it's a form of leakage where I normally refer to that as a confession, but in here the verbiage is a little bit different. It's leakage in the form of a literal interpretation of snippets of verbiage. So people will tend to, when they're being deceptive, they'll tend to embed a truthful statement, an incriminating statement, into an insinuation of other things. And so, for example, what you see here is she says, but what I can tell you is what I remember from that day is. And the phrase, but what I can tell you is completely unnecessary there.
Yeah.
If she would have just started that sentence and said, what I remember from that day is, that would be much easier to do. But she actually adds in that phrase. And the reason people do that is because they're thinking about it. It's on their brain. They're looking at that memory, and that Broca section of their brain is translating the memory into language. So as they're talking, as they're trying to fabricate, they end up accidentally putting that verbiage into what they're saying. So in here you get some leakage that she's been coached, because she says, what I can tell you is, and that is what you're seeing there. In this case, it's still a confession. She's confessing here that she's been coached.
Yeah, I just think that's so interesting. And that whole sentence at the end is, because then she goes on to say, which was, I'm sure, very similar to however I answered, because it's the same, which is like, if the answer is the same, then answer it. And if the answer is truthfully, it will be the same every single time. And I don't see why you have to clarify every single time, be like, which I'm sure it's the same, because it is like, yeah, obviously that's the case. But we know that she did not say certain things to the grand jury. And so that is part of the reason why she has to constantly be like, the story's the same, because according to your testimony, not necessarily.
Yeah, and this right here, this is why I continuously say, just keep your own question in mind.
Yeah.
Because she talks so much. Even having heard her questions and listened to them like 100 times, I still can't remember what his question was right now.
Same.
Yeah, she talked for so long that I can't imagine what it would be like to be a juror there.
Yeah, it's confusing. And so I guess this is another lesson for people. If you're actually, it's just a repeat lesson, don't ask compound questions and don't ask overly complex questions. Be very direct. It's the easiest way to do things, because if the questions are too long, or if they're compound, or if the answer is too long, suddenly it gets very confusing. So you said that when someone answers a question with more than 30 words, it is sensitive. And when it is more than 90 words, it's deception. You qualify this and you say that this is in an interrogation situation or in the courtroom setting. It's not just everyday life. So context matters. But I'm wondering, how does this apply to everyday life? Can we apply it to everyday life?
Well, in real life, you hear the phrase that if somebody's giving you too much detail, it's probably a lie.
Yeah.
And there is truth to that, but you have to understand the rules and when that applies and when it doesn't. Essentially, if you're asking somebody for a narrative on something, like, how was your day? Then you're going to get a narrative answer because that's what you asked for. But when you're asking a simple question that is either a yes or no question or a question that has a short answer, just a direct question that requires a direct answer. When you start getting a bunch of information, that is an indicator that there's a tremendous amount of sensitivity. So the person is going to give you some sort of an answer, but they haven't figured out exactly what they're going to say yet. And instead of just pausing and sitting there for a minute and thinking of a lie, they're going to start to ramble and give you a bunch of information that's going to make you forget what the question is. It's going to get you off on a tangent, and then they're eventually going to say something in there that is deceptive. What it boils down to is, based on the research that was done on this, if it's more than 30 words, then there's something that's sensitive about it. It could be that they did something else that's not directly related to this, but they don't want you to know about that. So it's sensitivity. But if it's more than 90 words, then it's not something else playing in on it. You know definitively that they're lying about what you asked.
The one thing that we do have to take into consideration, though, is context matters, the person matters. So if this individual is a certified yapper and you know that this individual is a talkative person, maybe not the best application. But if you know someone is generally not going to be talking a lot, then this is something that you would use more often with that individual.
Baseline matters.
Yes, exactly. Back to the baseline.
Yep.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to Attorney Jackson grilling McCabe on who she called after talking to Reed the morning they found O'Keefe's body, but before they found the body. And so I think this was like almost 5 in the morning, right before 5 in the morning. So you discussed throughout the video how the use of never can be used deceptively and how it can be used truthfully. So you say that if never replaces the word no, it is a truthful statement. But if never replaces the words did not or didn't, it is deceptive. And you mentioned it's because of the time constraint. And so here's the clip to give some context.
And then thereafter, at some point, you talked to Tom Beatty, correct?
I never spoke with Tom.
So in this situation, you said that she was being truthful, okay? And you said because the time is constrained here. So my first question is, can you explain what you mean when you say that the time is constrained?
So the word never in and of itself, without any other words around it, means not at any time in the past, present, or future. And so you have to constrain that in order to be able to use it to apply to a situation. So in here, she says, I never spoke to Tom. So the example of just a straight up deceptive answer to that would be, I would never speak to Tom. Because I would never speak to Tom includes the future. And that you don't know whether you're going to speak to Tom in the future. I know that you don't know that, which means I know that there's no commitment to what you're saying. So in order for it to be used properly, it has to be used with the right tense and refer back to that moment. So if she uses it in the past tense, does it apply to the entire past or does it apply to just that moment in time? So there's actually 2 different ways of saying that as well.
So here is the time constrained because they are specifically talking about a specific time period. They're saying in that morning, did you talk to Tom Beatty? And the thing is this was incorrect because she called Tom Beatty, but he did not answer. So she did not talk to him. And so is it constrained because it's implied that he's saying that morning, did you talk to Tom Beatty? And she's saying, I never spoke with him.
The confusion here could be the question of, doesn't past tense include the entire past? I never spoke to Tom. However, if that were the case, then Jen McCabe would have said, I have never spoken to Tom. So that would include the entire past where she says, I never spoke to Tom. I know this is minute details, but I never spoke to Tom is relating to just that incident where if she says, I have never spoken to Tom, that would just be the past, but that would include all of the past, not just that incident. So the time constraint is met here. But the other part of this is that she's not replacing the word I didn't, she's replacing the word no.
Yes.
Because it's a yes or no question. And she says, I never spoke to Tom, which is a replacement for saying no. There's 2 rules that they have to abide by. One is, are you replacing the word no, or are you replacing the word didn't? And then the other one is the time constraint.
Exactly. So I asked, why is it deceptive if the time is not constrained? And you kind of hinted at this, but let's spell it out clearly.
When somebody says, I would never do that, you know that they don't know the future. And so if I know that they don't know the future, then them telling me that is their way of diluting their answer, of not giving commitment to their answer in a way that they even know that they're not committed to the answer. So if a woman asks her boyfriend or her husband, did you cheat on me? And he says, I would never cheat on you. That's 100% deception because he has the ability right there to actually put the full weight and force of his commitment behind that statement, but he chooses to dilute it out, not only over the entire past, but over the entire future. And that's a way of reducing commitment to its very lowest level.
It's interesting because I get what you're saying. It just makes sense that would be the case. You can be truthful about the fact that you would never cheat on somebody. But I guess it's the fact that they say it that makes it dishonest. Not the fact that they would or wouldn't do it, right?
And that's not the question that they asked you.
Yeah, the question is, did you? And so the answer would be no. But it's so interesting because I think the average person, if they are not tuned into that, if they're not cued in, they would totally believe that. Because the way you would hear that and then internalize it is, well, I would also never cheat on my significant other. So they must be telling the truth. Whether you would or would not is not really the question at hand. What we should only be looking at is how that individual answered the question. And that's really hard to do in the average situation. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
You have to actually repeat to yourself, did they answer my question?
Yeah.
Because you have to ask yourself that question, and then you have to answer that question. So, if somebody says, I would never do that, that only answers the question, would you ever cheat on me? That doesn't answer the question, did you?
Yeah.
So the analogy that I give on this is, if you fall 6 feet on the ground and there's nothing on, it's just bare ground, it's going to hurt. That force is distributed over your whole body. But if you fall 6 feet onto a metal spike, that force is all delivered to one part of your body. Mm-hmm. What you're doing with your language is similar. When somebody says, did you kill that person, or did you cheat on me, or did you cheat on your diet, you have the opportunity right there to put the whole weight and force behind one particular point. And that's what a truthful person will do. They'll say, I didn't kill them, because they are purposefully taking this all the way down to one incident that happened in one point of time. That is their full commitment on that one little point. Whereas somebody who says, well, I would never do that, that's distributing this out over an infinite number of points of time that they didn't kill somebody, and there's only one of those that's incorrect.
It's about being convicted about something, which it seems to be a theme that continues to come up here, which is a truthful person is convicted about what they are trying to tell you, what they say, what they believe, what is truth. Whereas a deceptive person, they're constantly diffusing the answer because there is no conviction behind a lie.
Deceiving people is all about trying to portray conviction in a false manner.
Interesting, yeah. And I guess people are very bad at portraying that.
They can't, yeah. They can't. And I honestly don't know why, but it just seems like just saying those words, just say them. But deceptive people can't. They can't say it.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Okay, so we're still on this topic because I want to compare another never statement to really nail this down because it's so interesting.
Went to voicemail?
I'm not sure. All I can tell you is I never spoke to my sister Nicole that morning prior to waking her up.
Another all I can tell you, but
yeah.
Interesting. Once you start paying attention to it, you notice it a lot more. Okay.